Tonight, before you drift into sleep, try to imagine something rather strange. Long before human beings created laboratories, pills, or modern hospitals, there was once a time when every remedy came from nature itself. A leaf crushed gently between two hands, a fragment of bark simmered slowly inside a small clay pot, a soft fragrance spreading through the darkness of an ancient forest, and somehow it soothed pain, eased fever, or helped a restless soul sleep peacefully through the night. Perhaps the most astonishing thing of all is that plants were never created to heal human beings. The compounds hidden deep within roots, stems, and leaves were originally only ways for plants to protect themselves from insects, disease, and harsh environments. And yet, through thousands of years of quiet observation and experience, human beings slowly discovered that nature around them was never truly silent. Forests, gardens, and wild fields seemed to carry within them a vast hidden library of chemistry, where every plant guarded a secret of its own. And perhaps, through the eyes of Carl Gustav Jung, the connection between human beings and plants is not merely medical. It may also be an ancient memory, resting deep within the collective unconscious. A memory from a time when our ancestors lived closer to nature, slept beneath star-filled skies, listened to leaves trembling in the wind, and sought healing from the earth beneath their feet. Perhaps that is why the scent of lavender quiets the mind, why chamomile tea carries a feeling of safety, or why simply walking into a silent garden can make the human heart slow down ever so slightly. In tonight's video, we will move together through a very slow and gentle journey, exploring the most calming truths about medicinal plants, the silent companions that changed the history of medicine, saved millions of lives, and continue to walk beside us, even in the modern world. You will discover why plants are capable of creating compounds powerful enough to heal or to kill, how ancient people learned, the hidden secrets of nature, which plants became the foundation of modern medicine, and why nature may still be holding remedies humanity has not yet found. So now, allow your body to soften little by little. Relax your shoulders, breathe in slowly, and let tonight become a quiet journey through the ancient gardens of humankind. And if you enjoy slow, reflective stories that help you relax and drift more easily into sleep, please subscribe to the YouTube channel Stories for Sleep, so you may continue traveling with us through future journeys, a place where science, psychology, and the mysteries of the soul meet beneath the gentle light of the night. And now, let us begin. Part 1. The Origins of Medicine in Nature. As night slowly settles over the world and every sound beyond these walls begins to soften, perhaps this is the perfect moment to remember something ancient, something that existed long before humanity knew hospitals, laboratories, or the small modern pills resting in the palm of a hand. There was once a time when all of human medicine began with a leaf, a root, or the faint fragrance of wild herbs after the rain. If you imagine it slowly enough, you may begin to see our ancestors living in a very different world. There were no neon lights, no hum of machines, no complicated chemical formulas, only forests, damp earth, the sound of wind, and small human beings learning how to survive within the vastness of nature. When fever came, they turned to tree bark. When pain arrived, they chewed bitter leaves. When the spirit grew restless, they burned fragrant herbs and sat quietly beside the fire. And strangely enough, somehow nature always answered, not through language, not through clear instructions, but through feeling. A leaf eased pain, a root warmed the body during winter cold, a fragrance softened fear in the darkness. And through thousands of years of these slow observations, medicine began to emerge. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this story is this: plants were never created to heal human beings. The compounds hidden inside leaves, roots, bark, and seeds carried no intention to cure. Plants created them to protect themselves against insects, against disease, against animals, or simply to survive harsh conditions. A mint plant produces cool, sharp oils to drive away insects. A willow tree creates protective compounds within its bark. A lavender flower releases fragrance to communicate with insects and the world around it. And then, human beings arrived. We stepped into the forests, touched those leaves, breathed those scents, and slowly discovered that the survival mechanisms of plants could also heal the human body and mind. Seen through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, perhaps this is not only a scientific story, it is also a profound symbol of the invisible bond between human beings and nature. Jung believed that beneath our modern consciousness, there still exists an ancient layer of the unconscious, a place where humanity has not yet fully separated from forests, stone, and the rhythm of the natural world. Perhaps that is why stepping into a quiet garden naturally slows the heartbeat, why the scent of wood leaves or rain-soaked earth can awaken a feeling of safety that is difficult to explain, why simply watching sunlight pass through branches can gently calm the mind. Perhaps somewhere deep within the unconscious, the body still remembers. It remembers a time when human beings lived far closer to plants, a time when nature was not something outside of us, but part of life itself. We ate from the earth, slept beneath the sky, and healed ourselves with what grew around us. And in that world, medicinal plants were not merely ingredients for medicine. They were silent companions of humanity. What is fascinating is that plants are not truly passive despite their still appearance. Within every leaf, countless complex chemical reactions are unfolding. A tree cannot flee when attacked, so it must develop far more subtle ways to survive. It creates toxins to repel insects, fragrances to attract beneficial creatures, antioxidants to protect itself from harsh sunlight and dangerous microorganisms. And somehow, these substances enter the human body like a kind of chemical language. Some calm the nervous system, some reduce inflammation, some fight infection, some help the body sleep more deeply. As though there has always been a quiet conversation between human beings and plants, one we still understand only in small fragments. And if you think about it carefully, it truly is extraordinary. A tree standing silently through decades of rain and wind, slowly creating compounds to protect itself, eventually becomes the foundation of medicine for all humanity. But perhaps what makes this story even more profound is the way human beings learned these secrets. Not through modern technology, but through attention, through slowly observing nature. An ancient hunter may have noticed an injured animal eating certain leaves before recovering. A tribe may have discovered that a root eased pain after generations of experimentation. A mother may have realized that the scent of certain herbs helped a frightened child fall peacefully asleep. And from these small observations, knowledge accumulated across generations. Not inside cold laboratories, but in forests, beside fires, within small gardens behind humble homes. There is something deeply gentle in that image, because it reminds us that humanity's earliest wisdom did not come from controlling nature, but from listening to it. Today, modern people often believe we have separated ourselves from nature. We live in brightly lit cities, use mass-produced medicine, and rarely touch the soil with our own hands. Yet somewhere deep inside the body, perhaps we still respond to plants in profoundly ancient ways. A warm cup of tea late at night still calms the spirit. The scent of lavender still makes many people feel safe. The sound of leaves moving in the wind still carries peace, without explanation. Perhaps because our bodies are not as modern as we imagine. A very deep part of the unconscious still belongs to nature. Carl Gustav Jung once suggested that modern human suffering often comes from losing connection with our primordial instincts. And perhaps healing is not always about adding something new, but remembering something ancient. Remembering what it feels like to sit in nature without urgency. Remembering the silence of the forest. Remembering that the human body spent most of its existence living in harmony with plants and earth. And as you think about this tonight in the quiet stillness around you, you may begin to feel a soft gentleness within the mind. You do not need to understand every chemical reaction inside medicinal plants to feel this connection. You only need to imagine an ancient forest, a breeze carrying the scent of leaves, a small fire glowing beneath the night sky, and the first human beings of our species learning how to heal from the living world around them, not through domination, but through listening. And perhaps, after thousands of years have passed, that is still what the human soul longs for most. Not more noise, not more speed, but a slow moment to return to what is primal, to the breath, to silence, and to the feeling that nature has never truly left us. And as you remain within that slow and gentle feeling, perhaps you may begin to notice something even deeper, that plants do not heal the human body only through chemistry, but also through their presence. There is something very strange about nature. It never rushes. A tree does not hurry to grow. A leaf does not struggle to open before its season arrives. Everything within the plant world unfolds with a rhythm that is slow, deep, and patient. And if you think about that, within modern life, perhaps you will feel a quiet contrast. Human beings today move faster than ever before. We wake to alarm clocks, move through endless streams of information, and carry hundreds of thoughts that never fully settle. Even when night arrives, the mind does not truly rest. The body lies down, yet something inside continues moving. And perhaps that is why medicinal plants still comfort human beings in such a unique way. Not only because of their active compounds, but because they carry the rhythm of nature itself. A warm cup of herbal tea does not simply warm the body. It asks you to slow down. You must sit still, wait for the water to heat. Notice the fragrance drifting through the air, and during those small quiet minutes, the mind begins to soften. Perhaps that is why rituals involving medicinal plants are often so peaceful. Brewing tea, drying leaves, grinding herbs, boiling water, burning incense, all of them are slow movements. And perhaps in some way, human beings are not merely preparing medicine. We are trying to return to an older rhythm, a rhythm the body once understood very well. From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, much of modern suffering comes from losing contact with the primordial unconscious. We live too deeply within logic, speed, and control until we forget that somewhere beneath it, all the soul still belongs to a far older world, a world of fire, soil, plants, and the gentle darkness of night. Perhaps that is why plant fragrances awaken something so deep within us. The scent of mint may remind someone of a childhood garden. The warmth of ginger may recall the feeling of being cared for as a child. Lavender may bring a sense of safety we cannot fully explain. These reactions are not entirely rational. They go deeper, into the body's ancient memory, as though nature is still speaking to us through a very old language, older even than words, and strangely enough, the body still understands. Even though we have lived far from forests for so long, even though cities have replaced the sound of insects with engines, even though artificial light has hidden the night sky, some part of humanity still responds to plants exactly as our ancestors once did. Perhaps because throughout most of human history, nature was never something outside of us. It was home. Human beings once woke with the sun, slept when darkness came, and healed themselves with what grew nearby. And within that world, medicinal plants were not a product. They were part of life itself, part of the cycle between earth, water, air, and the human body. And when you think about this slowly enough, perhaps you begin to feel a quiet humility. Because no matter how advanced modern science becomes, many of humanity's most powerful medicines still began as plants. Aspirin came from willow bark. Morphine came from the opium poppy. Quinine used against malaria came from the cinchona tree. And hundreds of other compounds are still being discovered within forests humanity has not yet fully explored. It feels like a gentle reminder that nature has always been more complex than we imagine. A silent tree standing deep within a forest may contain chemical structures that modern science needs decades to understand. And that is beautiful, because it reminds us that mystery still exists in this world. There are still things beyond complete human control, and perhaps that feeling itself softens the mind. You do not need to understand everything. You do not need to control every part of life. You may simply sit quietly, breathe in the scent of warm tea, listen to leaves moving softly outside the window, and remember that life existed long before us. Plants were healing this world long before modern medicine appeared, not through magic, but through the patience of nature. And as you reflect on this in the quietness of tonight, perhaps you will begin to feel your body soften a little more, your breathing slower, your mind no longer trying to move so quickly. Because somewhere deep within, perhaps you are remembering an older rhythm, the rhythm of forests, the rhythm of trees, the rhythm of a world where humanity had not yet fully separated from nature. And within that distant memory, there is a primordial sense of safety, that you do not need to do anything more right now. You do not need to solve every thought. You do not need to fully understand your entire life. You are allowed to rest, like the earth resting after rain, like a tree standing silently beneath the moon, needing to prove nothing. And as you allow yourself to remain within that state, every sound begins to drift farther away. Every thought grows lighter. The body slowly sinks deeper into stillness. And perhaps this too is a form of ancient healing, not coming from medicine, not coming from explanation, but from finally allowing yourself to return to the slowness of nature. Very gentle, very deep, and very peaceful. Part 2. How the knowledge of medicinal plants was formed. As the night grows a little deeper and everything around you begins to slow, perhaps this is the perfect moment to reflect on something truly strange in human history. Something that seems small yet quietly connects thousands of years of civilization together. How did people separated by vast oceans, speaking different languages, living in different eras, and never even knowing of one another's existence, all discover that plants could heal? A tribe deep within the Amazon rainforest learned to use bark to reduce fever. A healer in ancient China used roots to soothe pain. Communities across Africa, South America, India, and ancient Europe, all in their own ways, slowly discovered that the natural world around them contained a special kind of wisdom. And if you pause long enough to think about it, it feels almost miraculous. Because there was no internet, no modern textbooks, no research laboratories or chemical analysis. There were only human beings and nature. And between those two, a very long conversation unfolded, not through words, but through observation, through patience, through countless trials and mistakes carried across generations. Perhaps the first knowledge of medicinal plants did not begin with a scientist, but with a mother sitting beside her feverish child in the night. An elder noticing that wounded animals ate certain leaves before recovering. A traveler in the forest realizing that some plants softened pain, while others were dangerous enough never to be touched. And from those small observations, knowledge slowly emerged, not quickly, not perfectly, but deeply. Through the eyes of Carl Gustav Jung, Perhaps this reflects something essential about the human soul, that deep within the collective unconscious human beings have always carried a longing to connect with nature, not only to survive, but also to seek meaning and healing. Jung believed that ancient symbols and instincts live within all of us beyond borders and time, and perhaps medicinal plants are one of those symbols, a healing leaf, a root that preserves life, a garden where people find hope amidst illness and fear. These images appear in nearly every civilization, not by accident, but because human beings everywhere once lived very close to nature. And as you think about this in tonight's quiet darkness, perhaps you may begin to feel that ancient wisdom was not created in the modern way. It did not begin with theories. It began with attention, a very slow attention, very deep. Ancient people had to observe the seasons, fragrances, colors of leaves, and the body's response after drinking an herbal infusion. They had to remember which plants reduced fever, which eased pain, and which helped sleep arrive more gently. And most importantly, they had to pass this knowledge on. Imagine a distant night long ago, a child sitting beside the fire while an elder speaks about the plants of the forest, which ones heal coughs, which stop bleeding, which must never be eaten. Knowledge did not live in books. It lived within human memory, and that memory traveled through spoken words, through stories, through lived experience. There is something profoundly gentle in that image, because it reminds us that humanity's earliest knowledge was not merely information, it was survival, it was love. It was one generation trying to protect the next from pain and illness. Perhaps that is why traditional medicine always feels deeply human. It did not begin inside cold buildings, but in forests, beside rivers, in marketplaces filled with the scent of herbs, in small gardens behind quiet homes, within indigenous communities that lived far closer to soil and seasons than most of us do today. If you close your eyes for a moment, perhaps you can almost imagine those places. A damp forest after rain, sunlight passing through leaves, bundles of herbs hanging to dry, the scent of plants and earth blending into the air. And within that landscape, human beings are learning, not by conquering nature, but by listening to it. What is fascinating is that many different civilizations arrived at similar conclusions even without contact with one another. And that makes one wonder, perhaps nature was always guiding humanity in some quiet way. Could fragrance, bitterness, color, or the body's response have silently led us? Or perhaps even deeper still, does the human body naturally resonate with plants? According to Carl Gustav Jung, when certain patterns appear again and again across cultures, they may reflect deeper structures within the collective unconscious. And perhaps humanity's universal search for medicinal plants is not merely biological coincidence. Perhaps it is also a primordial memory, an ancient understanding that nature is not entirely separate from us, that life itself contains invisible connections. And perhaps that feeling is what calms us when we step into a garden. Perhaps that is why so many people feel peace around trees without fully knowing why. Because somewhere deep within the body, something still remembers. It remembers humanity's older rhythm, a slower rhythm, a quieter rhythm, a life lived closer to nature. Today, we often believe knowledge comes only from books and technology. Yet the wisdom of medicinal plants reminds us that another kind of understanding exists, slower, more intuitive, rooted more in feeling than in theory. An ancient healer may not have known the chemical structure of mint, but they knew it soothed the stomach, not because they owned microscopes, but because they observed the human body through countless seasons of rain and sun. There is something very beautiful in that kind of knowledge. It does not separate human beings from nature. It places humanity within nature, as part of the same living ecosystem. And perhaps That is what the modern mind is missing. We know so much, yet sometimes we no longer truly feel, no longer truly listen, no longer slow down long enough to observe the world around us, while ancient healing traditions were built from precisely that slowness, from carefully observing a leaf, from remembering the body's reactions, from passing stories across generations. And as you reflect on this tonight, perhaps you may begin to feel a soft gentleness within the mind. You do not need to know everything. You do not need to understand every formula. Some forms of wisdom arise from living more slowly, observing more deeply, and reconnecting with the natural world around you. Perhaps that is why stories about medicinal plants always carry such a peaceful feeling, because they remind us that humanity once lived through attention, patience, and trust in nature far more than we do now. And deep inside, perhaps a part of us is still searching for the way back to that feeling. The feeling of sitting quietly among the scent of dried leaves, listening to the wind moving through branches at night, knowing that long before modern science existed, human beings were already trying to heal one another with all the gentleness they could find within nature. And as you remain within that slow and quiet space, perhaps you may begin to feel something even deeper, that the knowledge of medicinal plants was shaped not only by reason, but by memory. Not merely the memory of one individual, but the memory of humanity itself. A mother teaching her daughter how to use leaves to ease fever. An elder showing younger generations which roots could be eaten during harsh winters. A healer walking into the forest at dawn to gather herbs growing beside a stream. These images repeat across thousands of years beneath different skies and across distant lands. Yet somehow, they all carry the same familiar spirit. Human beings have always searched for healing in nature, and nature somehow always responded. Not always immediately, not always perfectly. There were mistakes, heavy costs, plants that healed in small doses yet became poison in larger ones, entire communities that needed generations to truly understand how to use a single species correctly. And perhaps that is what makes this wisdom so profound, because it was not created in a single moment. It accumulated through time, through patience, through both the suffering and hope of countless people who lived before us. And if you think about it carefully, it is deeply moving, because every traditional remedy is not simply a formula, it is a story about human beings trying to care for one another in a world filled with illness, coldness, and uncertainty. And perhaps that is why such knowledge was often passed down through spoken stories rather than written texts. A grandmother may not know the scientific term for ginger, but she knows it warms the body on cold nights. An indigenous healer may not understand the molecular structure of bark, but they know it can save someone suffering from fever. This knowledge is not separate from life. It was born directly from lived experience. According to Carl Gustav Jung, there are things human beings understand not only through logic, but through symbols and intuition deep within the unconscious. And perhaps the wisdom of medicinal plants belongs to that world as well. It is not entirely science in the modern sense. It is also a quiet dialogue between humanity and nature, slow, silent, and unfolding across thousands of years. Perhaps that is why ancient medicinal gardens often feel almost sacred, not only because of the plants themselves, but because those places carry the memory of care. Imagine a small marketplace hundreds of years ago, the air filled with the scent of dried leaves, wood flowers, and roots. Merchants speaking softly about a new herb found in the mountains, a mother buying bundles of leaves for her coughing child, an old man in the corner, slowly grinding medicine with a stone mortar. Everything unfolds slowly. No one rushes, because wisdom in those days required time. You had to listen, to observe, to remember, and perhaps that slowness itself was part of healing. Today, we often want every answer immediately. A pill for a headache, an instant solution for anxiety. Yet traditional medicine reminds us that healing sometimes resembles the way plants grow slowly, little by little, almost invisible in each passing moment, yet capable of changing everything over time. A cup of tea may not erase sadness in a single night, but it may calm the body enough for rest to arrive. A fragrance may not solve every fear, but it may remind the mind that it is safe, and sometimes that alone is already enough. Perhaps that is why rituals involving medicinal plants are so often repetitive and quiet. Brewing tea, boiling water, drying leaves beneath the sun, grinding herbs by hand. All these acts feel like gentle reminders that the human body was never meant to live too quickly, that healing does not always come from fixing. Sometimes it comes from allowing yourself to slow down. And if you reflect on that tonight, perhaps you will begin to feel something light within your heart, that our ancestors lived most of their lives without modern technology, yet they still found ways to care for one another, not perfectly, but with patience, with observation, with hope. And perhaps it was that hope that kept the knowledge of medicinal plants alive for thousands of years. Not because every remedy was correct, but because human beings never stopped believing that nature contained something capable of healing, a leaf, a root, a soft fragrance drifting through the night. These seemingly small things have traveled beside humanity throughout nearly all of our existence. And even now, though the world has changed so much, perhaps a part of you still responds to them in a deeply primal way. You still feel comforted by the scent of warm tea, still feel peace when stepping into a quiet garden, still sense something profound when listening to leaves moving in the night wind. Perhaps because your body remembers, not through thought, but through feeling. It remembers that human beings once belonged to nature far more than we now realize. And as you allow yourself to remain with that feeling a little longer, everything seems to slow. Breathing softens. Shoulders relax. The mind no longer needs to keep running endlessly, as though somewhere deep within an ancient part of you is recognizing something familiar, that beyond these walls there are still trees, still soil, still fragrances your ancestors once knew, and still a slower rhythm of life existing quietly alongside the modern world, a rhythm that is peaceful, deep, and gentle. And perhaps that is what the human soul has always searched for during sleepless nights. Not more noise, not more answers, but the feeling of returning to something primal, to sit quietly within nature, to listen to the silence of the forest, and to remember that healing sometimes begins with the smallest things, a leaf, a fragrance, and a slow moment in which a human being finally allows themselves to rest. Part 3. The medicinal plants that changed the history of medicine. As the night grows quieter and the world beyond slowly sinks into the deep stillness of darkness, perhaps this is the right moment to reflect on something truly strange, that the history of human medicine has changed many times. Because of a single plant, not because of enormous machines, not because of modern cities, but because of a bitter bark growing beside a river, a small flower in a tropical forest, or a silent plant that lived for centuries, while no one realized it carried within itself the power to save millions of lives. And if you think about that slowly enough, it begins to feel almost mystical, because plants never tried to become medicine. They were simply living, quietly absorbing light, water, and soil as they had done for millions of years. And yet somehow the survival mechanisms of plants accidentally became humanity's hope. Perhaps this reminds us that nature has always been far deeper than its quiet appearance suggests. A willow tree standing silently beside the water seems entirely ordinary. Yet hidden within its bark is salicin, the compound that later inspired aspirin, one of the most famous pain relievers in human history. Imagine that. For thousands of years, people chewed willow bark to reduce fever and ease pain, without truly knowing what was happening inside the body. They only knew that nature softened suffering. And then, centuries later, modern science arrived and isolated that compound into aspirin, a tiny tablet found almost everywhere in the world. It feels as though humanity finally learned how to read one very small fragment of the chemical language of plants. And seen through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, perhaps this carries a deep symbolic meaning as well. Jung believed that humanity often forgets that the deepest forms of wisdom do not always begin in laboratories. Sometimes they begin through intuition, observation, and the ancient relationship between human beings and nature. Perhaps that is why stories about medicinal plants feel both scientific and strangely dreamlike. A small Madagascar periwinkle flower once grew quietly in tropical climates unnoticed by the world. No one could have imagined that within it were compounds capable of slowing uncontrolled cell division. Later, those compounds became the foundation for treatments against childhood leukemia. And if you dwell on that long enough, it almost feels impossible to believe. A small and delicate flower quietly existing in nature, capable of changing the fate of thousands of families around the world. There is something deeply moving in that image, as though nature is not merely a landscape in which humanity exists, but a vast library of life itself, a library of which we have opened only the first few pages. And then there are plants like foxglove, beautiful, fragile, almost poetic, with purple bell-shaped flowers trembling softly in the wind. Yet hidden within that beauty are compounds powerful enough to directly affect the rhythm of the human heart. In the correct dose, it saves lives. In the wrong dose, it can kill. And that reminds us that nature is not entirely gentle. It always carries two sides: healing and danger, life and death. And perhaps it is precisely this duality that makes medicinal plants so extraordinary. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the strongest symbols within the human unconscious often contain opposing forces: darkness and light, healing and destruction. Plants are no different. The opium poppy can soothe humanity's most unbearable pain, yet at the same time, it can also pull a life into addiction and suffering. Perhaps no plant reflects human contradiction more clearly than the opium poppy. It gave humanity morphine, one of the most powerful pain medicines ever discovered. It allowed severely ill patients to endure suffering, made surgery possible, helped countless people face the final hours of life with less pain. And yet, it also brought war, addiction, and long historical tragedies. And this reveals a profound truth: no form of power is entirely harmless. Perhaps it is human beings themselves who determine whether something becomes medicine or poison. A compound is not inherently good or evil. It simply exists. Meaning is created through the way we use it. And then history continued to change through other plants. The cinchona tree of South America contained quinine, an anti-malarial compound that helped humanity survive in disease-ridden tropical regions. One could even say that without quinine, the history of exploration and colonization across much of the world might have unfolded very differently. And if you think carefully about that, it feels astonishing. A tree growing in the mountains of South America, influencing global history, as though the fate of entire civilizations is sometimes shaped by things far smaller and quieter than we imagine. Then, centuries later, humanity discovered artemisinin from sweet wormwood, another great breakthrough in the treatment of malaria. Once again, nature had quietly been holding the answer, long before human beings learned how to find it. And perhaps what makes all these stories truly profound is the humility they inspire. Because no matter how powerful modern science becomes, Many of medicine's greatest turning points still began with human beings learning how to listen to nature, not conquer it, not create everything from nothing, but observe, be patient, and learn to understand what plants have been quietly developing through millions of years of evolution. Even the yew tree, once considered poisonous and associated with graveyards in many European cultures, eventually gave humanity Taxol, an important compound in cancer treatment, and that feels like a powerful Jungian symbol, that sometimes the greatest capacity for healing exists precisely within what we fear. Light and darkness are never completely separate. Life and death always stand close together, and nature understands this far more deeply than human beings do. As you think about all these plants tonight, perhaps the atmosphere around you begins to soften a little, because these stories remind us that the world is still filled with mystery. There are still wonders hidden within small and ordinary things. A tree standing silently in the rain, a flower growing beside the road, a piece of dry bark no one notices, and those things may hold the power to change human lives. And perhaps the same is true within ourselves. There are small parts of the soul we often ignore, memories, emotions, things that seem insignificant. Yet sometimes they contain the deepest capacity for healing. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the inner journey is not about eliminating darkness, but learning to recognize the hidden value within it. And nature seems to remind us of this constantly. A medicinal plant may become poison. A poison may become medicine. Everything depends on how we understand and use it. And as you allow your thoughts to drift slowly with that idea, everything begins to soften. You do not need to fully understand this world. You do not need to solve every mystery of nature. You may simply sit quietly, listen to your breathing, and feel that somewhere out there beneath moonlight and within distant forests, plants are still silently creating mysterious compounds, just as they have done for millions of years, without rushing, without needing attention, simply existing. And perhaps that quiet existence itself is one of the deepest forms of healing nature has ever offered humanity. Part 4. The thin boundary between medicine and poison. As the night grows deeper, and every sound around you slowly dissolves into the gentle stillness of late evening, perhaps this is the perfect moment to reflect on one of nature's strangest truths, that the boundary between medicine and poison is sometimes so delicate, it becomes almost invisible. A single leaf may heal, and yet that very same leaf, in a different dose, may also become dangerous. One compound may save a person suffering in pain, but if it moves beyond the body's narrow limits, it can become destructive. And if you think about that slowly enough, there is something both frightening and deeply beautiful within it, because nature has never been entirely gentle in the way human beings often imagine. It does not divide everything into good and evil the way we tend to do. A plant creates toxins not out of cruelty. It is simply trying to survive. The powerful compounds hidden within leaves, roots, and seeds are forms of defense against insects, disease animals that feed on leaves or harsh environments. And then the human body enters the story, and somehow, in a very strange way, many substances created to kill or repel other living creatures become medicine when used correctly. Perhaps this is one of the deepest lessons medicinal plants offer humanity. There is no absolute boundary between healing and destruction. Everything depends upon balance. And perhaps the same is true within the human soul. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, the most dangerous thing is not the existence of darkness within us. The danger comes when human beings remain unconscious of it. Jung believed that everything within the psyche carries two sides: light and shadow, healing and destruction consciousness, and the unconscious, and nature seems to reflect this principle perfectly. A foxglove plant with soft purple blossoms may steady the human heart in small doses, yet the very same compound, if it exceeds the body's limits, can cause the heart to stop. An opium poppy may help human beings endure unbearable pain, but at the same time, it can also pull a life into addiction and despair. And this reminds us that nature does not operate according to human morality. It operates according to balance, and that balance is incredibly fragile. If you listen to this slowly in the quiet of the night, perhaps you may begin to feel that the human body itself is just as delicate. A heartbeat that is too slow becomes dangerous, but one that is too fast becomes dangerous as well. An emotion completely suppressed may numb the soul. Yet emotions that flood without restraint can also destroy a person. Everything in life seems to exist between two extremes. Not too little, not too much, and perhaps true healing is the art of balance. The most powerful medicinal plants often affect the body's most essential systems directly: the nervous system, the heart, the liver, the blood, and the brain. They are not gentle in the simplest sense. They are powerful because they can alter the way the body functions at its deepest levels. One compound may calm seizures within the nervous system. Another may alter the rhythm of the heart. Some affect consciousness, emotion, and the perception of pain. And if you think carefully about that, it is astonishing. A tiny leaf growing quietly in a forest, capable of influencing the very center of human life. Yet for that very reason, the line between healing and danger becomes very thin. Perhaps this is why traditional medicine once carried such profound respect toward medicinal plants. Healers did not merely use plants. They understood they were working with forces that required caution. Some plants could only be used in very small amounts. Certain remedies had to be boiled for precise lengths of time. Some roots could only be harvested during a specific season. Everything demanded attention, patience, and humility before nature. Today, modern people often grow accustomed to the feeling of control. We want everything to be clear, precise, and completely safe. Yet, medicinal plants remind us that nature cannot be entirely simplified. A compound that saves lives today, under different conditions, may cause harm. That is not nature's fault. It is because every form of power requires balance. And perhaps if we look more deeply, this is also a powerful psychological symbol. According to Carl Gustav Jung, much human suffering arises when we attempt to eliminate parts of ourselves entirely: anger, fear, desire, or the shadow within. But Jung believed the true task was not to destroy these things, but to become conscious of them and learn how to integrate them. Because even the most dangerous parts of the soul sometimes contain the energy needed for life itself. Just like poison within medicinal plants, when misunderstood and uncontrolled, it can destroy. But when understood properly, it can heal. Perhaps that is why so many modern medicines have emerged from substances once feared. Snake venom became the foundation for certain heart medications. Bacterial toxins helped humanity create vaccines. Compounds that once terrified people eventually saved millions of lives. And there is a profound beauty in that truth. Sometimes the things we fear most contain the greatest capacity for healing. And if you think about this within yourself, perhaps there are parts of your inner world you once tried to avoid. Painful memories, intense emotions, fears too difficult to name. Yet according to Carl Gustav Jung, true healing begins when we dare to look into that darkness, not by erasing it, but by understanding it. Like ancient healers, learning how to transform poisonous plants into medicine, not denying their power, not underestimating their danger, but learning how to live alongside them in balance. And as you think about all of this tonight, perhaps you begin to feel a soft, gentleness within the mind. That life is not always simple, that some things are both dangerous and beautiful, both painful and healing. And perhaps maturity is not about finding a perfectly safe world, but learning how to move through fragility with greater awareness and gentleness, like an ancient healer, carefully measuring each leaf, like nature itself, always holding life in delicate balance. And as you allow your thoughts to drift slowly with that idea, the body itself seems to soften. Breathing becomes slower. The shoulders relax. Thoughts lose some of their sharp edges. Because somewhere deep within, perhaps you are sensing something very ancient. That healing is not the absence of darkness, but learning how to live beside it without allowing it to destroy you, just as plants have done for millions of years, quietly creating toxins in order to survive, and then, unintentionally, creating medicine for the world as well. Perhaps that is one of nature's most beautiful paradoxes, and also one of humanity's most beautiful paradoxes. Part 5. Plants as living chemical laboratories. As the night grows deeper and quieter, perhaps you may begin to feel something strange about the world of plants, that the trees standing silently outside are not nearly as simple as they appear. A forest seen from afar seems still and peaceful. Leaves tremble softly in the wind. Tree trunks stand motionless beneath moonlight, as though nothing at all is happening within them. And yet, if you could look into that invisible world, you would discover that every tree is like an enormous living chemical laboratory, silent, patient, and unimaginably complex. Within every leaf, every root, every layer of bark, thousands of chemical reactions unfold each second. Plants constantly create compounds in order to survive, adapt, and communicate with the world around them. Alkaloids, flavonoids, terpenes, glycosides, names that sound cold and scientific, are in truth part of nature's hidden language, a language plants were using millions of years before human beings ever appeared. And if you think about that slowly enough, there is something profoundly beautiful in it. A tree cannot run when insects attack it. It cannot move to a safer place. So it must learn to survive in another way. It creates bitterness so animals will not eat its leaves. It releases essential oils to repel insects. It produces antioxidants to protect its cells from heat and disease. And then, somehow in a very strange way, those same survival mechanisms become medicine for human beings. Perhaps this is one of the reasons nature feels so mysterious. It does not try to serve humanity, and yet humanity still finds healing within it. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, perhaps this reflects a profound truth about the unconscious connection between humanity and nature. Jung believed that modern people often imagine themselves separated from the natural world, while deep within the collective unconscious, we still remain part of it. Perhaps that is why the human body responds so strongly to the scent of plants. The fragrance of mint sharpens the mind. Lavender calms the spirit. The scent of pine forests carries a feeling of purity that is difficult to explain, not only because of chemistry, but because of the body's primordial memory. Some part of us still remembers that humanity spent most of its existence living among plants and forests. And as you think about this tonight, perhaps you begin to see trees differently, no longer as silent objects, but as living beings constantly responding to the world around them. What is fascinating is that no two trees are ever completely identical, even within the same species. A lavender plant growing on a sunny mountainside may produce different oils from one growing in colder soil. Mint growing in dry earth will smell different from mint beside a water source. Altitude, climate seasons, insects, microorganisms within the soil, all of these silently alter the chemistry within a plant. And if you think carefully about that, it is extraordinary, because it means plants do not merely live, they respond, they register their environment. They transform according to what they experience, and perhaps human beings do the same. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the human psyche is not a fixed structure. We are constantly shaped by environment, memory wounds, love, fear, and lived experience. A person raised in gentleness becomes different from one raised in uncertainty. A soul that has passed through suffering develops a different inner chemistry from one that has lived in peace. Just like plants, the same seed, placed in different environments, may become entirely different forms of life. Perhaps that is why nature moves human beings so deeply, because when we truly look at it, we are also seeing ourselves. A tree does not grow separate from the world around it. It absorbs light soil, water, wind, and even the wounds carried by its environment. Human beings are no different. We are shaped by what we have lived through, by encounters, by memories, by emotional winters, by difficult seasons of life. And just as plants create compounds to survive, human beings develop inner mechanisms. Some learn strength. Some create gentleness as a way of surviving a harsh world. And seen in this way, every soul is also a living laboratory, quietly responding to life, quietly transforming, constantly adapting. Perhaps the most beautiful thing about plants is not that they are perfect, but that they always respond to life. A long drought may cause a plant to create stronger compounds for protection. An insect attack may change a flower's fragrance in order to attract helpful insects. Even microorganisms within the soil influence how a plant grows, and that means no life exists alone. Everything is connected. Everything affects everything else. And as you think about this in the quietness of the night, perhaps you begin to feel a little lighter. You do not need to become a fixed version of yourself. You are allowed to change, allowed to respond to life, allowed to become different because of what you have experienced. Just as plants constantly alter their inner chemistry to adapt to the world around them, and perhaps that is not weakness. Perhaps it is a sign of life itself. Modern people often prefer things that are stable, predictable, and precise. But nature reminds us that true life is always fluid. A medicinal plant is never exactly the same. A forest never completely repeats itself. Everything changes with light, rain, seasons, and time. And that change itself creates beauty. If every tree were identical, nature would feel lifeless. If every human being were the same, the world would feel lifeless as well. Perhaps that is why Carl Gustav Jung believed that the journey of maturity is not about becoming perfect, but becoming fully oneself, with all one's changes, shadows, and differences. A tree growing upon a windy cliff will become different from one growing within a peaceful valley. But neither tree is wrong. They simply reflect the environments they have lived through. And perhaps the same is true for you. What you have experienced has left traces within your soul. Not all of them were gentle, but they helped shape the person you are now. And as you think about that within tonight's soft darkness, perhaps you begin to feel a little more compassion toward yourself. You do not need to force yourself to be endlessly strong. You do not need to be perfect. You are simply responding to life, just like every other living thing in this world, like plants quietly altering their inner chemistry in order to continue existing. And perhaps that too is a profound wisdom of life itself. Not resisting change, but learning how to transform alongside it. And as your mind slowly drifts with that thought, everything around you seems to slow as well. Breathing softens. The body grows slightly heavier. Thoughts lose some of their sharpness. You do not need to understand every mysterious chemical reaction within plants. You do not need to solve all the secrets of nature. You may simply imagine a forest sleeping beneath the moonlight, the trees standing silently, yet deep inside them, thousands of reactions continue, quietly, patiently, without rest, just like the life within you. And within that silence, perhaps your body begins to remember something very ancient. That healing is not always about fixing. Sometimes it is simply the quiet process of adapting and continuing to live gently, slowly, and very naturally. Part 6. How humanity learned to activate medicinal properties. As the night grows deeper and the light around you softens like a thin layer of mist, perhaps this is the perfect moment to reflect on something very strange in human history, that nature not only gave us medicinal plants, but also quietly taught us how to awaken the power hidden within them. A fresh leaf is not entirely the same as a dried one. A whole garlic bulb is not as powerful as garlic that has been crushed. A green tea leaf after fermentation becomes something entirely different. And if you think carefully about that, it feels almost mysterious. Because sometimes the true power of a plant does not exist in its original form, but only appears after it passes through transformation. And perhaps human beings are the same. Long before people understood enzymes or chemical reactions, our ancestors quietly observed that the way medicinal plants were prepared could completely alter their effects, drying them beneath sunlight, boiling them in water, soaking them in alcohol, exposing them to smoke, fermenting them in darkness. These seemingly simple acts were in truth changing the chemical structures hidden within the plants themselves. And perhaps this resembles a kind of ancient alchemy, not magic, but patience and observation directed toward nature. An ancient healer may not have known about allicin, the powerful antibacterial compound within garlic, but they noticed that once garlic was crushed, its scent became stronger, and the body responded differently. They did not understand what was happening on the molecular level, yet they understood that nature itself was changing when touched and transformed. And from those slow observations, knowledge was born. If you listen to this quietly tonight, perhaps you may begin to feel that ancient people lived much closer to transformation than we do now. They saw how heat changed medicinal plants, how time altered the fragrance of tea leaves, how fire, water, and air could awaken different qualities hidden within plants. And perhaps they understood something very profound that modern people often forget, that transformation is not always destruction. Sometimes it simply reveals what was sleeping within. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, many forms of inner growth unfold in the same way. Jung believed that the deepest essence of the soul does not always appear at the beginning. Sometimes, human beings only discover their true strength after passing through pain, pressure, loss, or change. Just as garlic only creates allicin once it is crushed, just as mint leaves release their oils only after being pressed, there are things within us that appear only after we have passed through the collisions of life, and that is not always tragic. Perhaps it is simply the way life reveals deeper layers of itself. If you imagine someone sitting beside a fire hundreds of years ago, slowly boiling herbs through a cold night, there is something deeply peaceful in that image. They were not merely making medicine. They were participating in a process of transformation. Hot water softens leaves. Fire alters the structure of roots. Time draws invisible compounds out of plants. And in the end, what remains is no longer what it was before. Perhaps that is why tea became such a beautiful symbol across many cultures. A simple leaf, after passing through heat and time, becomes a drink capable of soothing the human spirit. And that feels almost like a metaphor for the soul itself, that sometimes the deepest gentleness does not come from remaining unchanged, but from allowing oneself to move through transformation. Perhaps you have experienced this too. There may have been moments that wounded you deeply, periods when you felt crushed by life itself. And yet, slowly, something else emerged, a deeper maturity, a gentler understanding toward others, a depth you never possessed before. According to Carl Gustav Jung, human beings do not mature by avoiding pain. We mature by becoming conscious of how pain has transformed us. Just like medicinal plants, fermentation may create entirely new chemistry within tea leaves. Smoke curing may alter the fragrance and activity of herbs. Every process leaves traces behind, and perhaps every experience in your life does the same. Nothing truly passes through you without changing you. But change is not always loss. Sometimes it is an opening. What is fascinating is that ancient methods such as drying, infusing, and fermenting often required immense amounts of time. There was no rushing these processes. Certain herbs needed to hang beneath rooftops for weeks in order to dry properly. Medicinal infusions rested in darkness for months. Ancient people understood that nature has its own rhythm. You cannot force it to move faster. And perhaps that is what the modern mind is slowly forgetting. We want everything immediately. We want healing quickly. We want transformation quickly. We want answers now. But medicinal plants remind us that the deepest transformations often require time. A leaf does not become tea in a few seconds. A soul does not heal instantly either. Everything has its own season, its own temperature, its own rhythm. And if you listen to this tonight within the soft darkness, perhaps you may begin to feel more tenderness toward yourself. You do not need to be fine immediately. You do not need to heal quickly. You do not need to become a perfect version of yourself overnight. You are like those ancient medicinal plants, a living being moving through its own process of transformation, quietly, slowly, and sometimes the most beautiful parts within you emerge only after the very transformations you once feared. Perhaps that is why nature always feels comforting, because it never forces anything to happen too quickly. A forest knows how to wait. A tree knows how to grow according to the seasons. A leaf knows when it must dry in order to release a new fragrance. And perhaps the human body also longs to live within that slower rhythm. Not always running, not always striving, sometimes simply remaining within its own process, like a teapot slowly releasing its fragrance into the night, without rushing, without needing to prove anything, simply becoming what it is slowly turning into. And as you allow your thoughts to drift gently with that idea, everything around you seems softer. Breathing slows. The body grows slightly heavier. Thoughts lose their tension. You do not need to understand every chemical reaction within plants. You do not need to know exactly what is changing inside yourself. You may simply trust that life knows how to transform, just as plants have done for millions of years, quietly changing beneath sunlight, rain, and time. And within that deep stillness, perhaps you too are changing in your own way, gently, slowly, and with great tenderness. Part 7. The Great Traditions of Ancient Medicine. As the night settles more deeply, and every sound beyond you drifts farther away, perhaps this is the right moment to think about something truly beautiful in human history, that in so many different places across the earth, human beings have always tried to heal one another with all the gentleness they could find in nature. Long before brightly lit hospitals existed, long before modern research laboratories, there were ancient medical traditions built from leaves, roots, memory, and observations, carried through thousands of years. And if you think about that slowly, there is something deeply moving within it. Because those people did not possess the technology we have today, and yet they never stopped searching for ways to ease suffering, never stopped trying to understand the body, sleep, illness, and life itself. And perhaps that search became one of humanity's most beautiful expressions. Ancient Egyptian medicine is a strange and beautiful example of this. Thousands of years ago, beside the Nile River, people began recording medicinal knowledge onto papyrus scrolls. They wrote about leaves, tree resins, oils, and remedies for different forms of pain within the body. Imagine that scene tonight. A scribe sitting beneath the faint glow of an oil lamp. Desert winds moving softly along stone walls. The scent of dried herbs lingering somewhere within a darkened room. And within that silence, humanity is trying to preserve wisdom for the future. There is something profound in that act, because writing is not merely preserving information. It is a way of resisting forgetting, a way of telling future generations. We learned this from nature, and we want you to continue living. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, ancient symbols carry such power because they contain humanity's collective memory. And perhaps those first medical writings were a form of memory as well. Memory of suffering, hope, and the longing to heal that has accompanied human beings for thousands of years. Then, in another region of the world, traditional Chinese medicine emerged as a vast and delicate system, almost like a universe of its own. Not merely herbs, but balance. Yin and yang, heat and cold, sleep and breath, human beings and nature. Ginseng, licorice root, ephedra. These names were not simply medicinal ingredients. They formed part of an entire philosophy of life. Within that worldview, the body was never separate from nature. A healthy person was someone living in harmony with the rhythms of the surrounding world. Perhaps that is what makes Eastern medicine feel so different. It does not only ask, how do we eliminate illness? It asks, what within life has fallen out of balance? And if you reflect on that in modern life today, the question still feels deeply meaningful. Because sometimes the body is exhausted not only from illness, but because the mind has lived too long with intention, because sleep has been lost, because human beings have forgotten how to rest. Perhaps that is why so many ancient healing practices are connected to slowness. Drinking tea, meditation, sleeping at the proper hour, walking through nature, listening to the breath. These seemingly small things are actually foundations of inner balance. And then in ancient India, Ayurveda emerged as another great stream of human wisdom. Within Ayurveda, healing does not arise only from herbs. It comes from the way we eat, the way we sleep, the way the body moves, the way energy flows within a human being. And if you think carefully about that, there is something beautiful in it, because it views the human being as a living whole, not as a machine requiring repairs to isolated parts, but as a small ecosystem, an inner world. According to Carl Gustav Jung, much modern suffering appears when we lose connection with our own inner wholeness. We divide life into work, emotions, body sleep, and then try to solve each piece separately. Yet ancient medical systems seem to understand that everything is connected. An anxious mind may weaken the body. Deep sleep may heal more than we realize. An emotion suppressed too long may become illness. Perhaps that is why traditional medicine often feels both scientific and spiritual, not superstition, but an understanding that human beings do not live only through the physical body. We also live through memory, emotion, biological rhythms, and things that remain invisible. What is even more remarkable is that much of modern medicine's important knowledge has come from indigenous communities, people who once lived very close to nature. A rainforest tribe may know which plants reduce fever. A mountain community may understand which roots ease pain. An indigenous healer may understand the forest the way a modern scholar understands a library. And then centuries later, science arrives, analyzes those plants, and discovers that they truly contain medically valuable compounds. And this brings a quiet sense of humility, because it reminds us that wisdom does not exist only within universities or laboratories. Sometimes, It lives within the memory of people who remained closer to the soil and trees than we are today. Perhaps that is something the modern world occasionally forgets. We often believe progress means leaving the old behind, and yet many of the newest discoveries begin by returning to ancient wisdom, as though humanity is slowly realizing that nature was never truly outdated. And as you think about all these healing traditions tonight, perhaps you begin to feel something deeply gentle, that throughout history, whether in the deserts of Egypt, the mountains of China, the rivers of India, or distant tropical forests, human beings have always shared the same desire to ease one another's suffering, to help each other sleep more peacefully, to keep life continuing just a little longer. Perhaps that is the most beautiful thing about traditional medicine. Not only the plants themselves, but the care that lives within them. A mother preparing herbal tea for her child, an elderly healer slowly selecting each leaf, a community passing healing wisdom across generations. All these images carry a profoundly human tenderness, and perhaps that is also what our souls long for within the modern world. Not only medicine, but the feeling of being cared for, being listened to, being allowed to slow down enough for body and mind to recover, just as ancient medicinal gardens have done for thousands of years, quietly, patiently, and with love. And as you allow your thoughts to drift with that feeling, everything around you seems softer. Breathing becomes lighter. The body settles. Thoughts no longer feel the need to keep running endlessly. You do not need to fully understand every ancient medical system in order to feel what they are trying to say. That humanity has never truly been separate from nature, and that the deepest healing sometimes begins with very simple things. A deep night of sleep, a warm cup of tea, a body allowed to rest, a soul finally permitting itself to slow down beneath the peaceful darkness of the night. Part 8. The familiar medicinal plants around us. As the night slowly settles and every sound around you becomes a little softer, perhaps this is the perfect moment to reflect on something gentle that modern people often forget, that sometimes the things with the deepest power to heal have always been very close to us. Not hidden in distant places, not concealed inside secret laboratories, but quietly present in the kitchen, in a small garden, or within the familiar fragrance of a warm cup of tea late at night. A piece of ginger, a sprig of mint, a clove of garlic, a dried lavender flower resting beside the window. These simple things have accompanied humanity for thousands of years, and perhaps what makes them special is not only their medicinal properties, but the profound sense of closeness they carry. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, there are symbols that appear again and again within the collective, unconscious: the home, the fire, the garden, the healer. And strangely enough, many of the familiar medicinal plants around us are connected to those very images. Not strange or distant things, but things that evoke safety. A kitchen filled with the warmth of ginger, a cup of chamomile tea before sleep, the soft scent of lavender drifting through the night. These small things seem to touch something ancient within the soul, perhaps because the human body has lived beside them for so long. Garlic is a fascinating example. Something with a strong smell, a sharp taste, and a roughness that modern people sometimes find overwhelming. Yet for thousands of years it has been regarded as one of humanity's most important medicinal plants. Ancient people used garlic to fight infection, warm the body, and support circulation. And if you think about that slowly, there is something beautiful in it. A small bulb growing quietly beneath the earth, absorbing minerals and sunlight, eventually becoming something that helps human beings resist illness. Perhaps nature has always hidden its greatest powers inside the most ordinary forms. Just like human beings, the gentlest souls are often those who have endured the greatest hardships. Then there is ginger, a root carrying a uniquely comforting warmth. Simply inhaling the scent of ginger simmering in hot water seems to soften the body a little. Ginger eases nausea, warms the stomach, and helps the body feel safer during cold days. But perhaps even more interesting is the emotional atmosphere it creates, because ginger does not merely affect the body, it creates a feeling, a warmth that feels almost like memory itself. Perhaps you drank ginger tea while sick as a child. Perhaps you remember the scent of ginger drifting through your family's kitchen. And now, whenever that fragrance returns, the body immediately remembers what it felt like to be cared for. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the deepest memories are not always stored in thought. Often they live within sensations, fragrances, and symbols. And medicinal plants may be among the most powerful languages of memory that nature offers humanity. And then there is turmeric, carrying a golden color like sunlight preserved beneath the earth. Turmeric reduces inflammation, supports healing, and has existed within countless ancient healing traditions. But on a deeper level, it also carries the feeling of recovery itself. There is something peaceful about watching turmeric dissolve slowly into warm water, as though nature itself is gently merging with the body. Mint feels different. It carries coolness, clarity, and wakefulness. Simply crushing a mint leaf between your fingertips releases its fragrance like a breeze moving through the mind. Ancient people used mint to ease intestinal discomfort, support digestion, and calm the body. Yet mint also feels like a quiet reminder that nature knows how to awaken life through the smallest things: a leaf, a fragrance, a deep breath. And then there is lavender, perhaps one of the plants most strongly associated with sleep in the modern imagination. The scent of lavender is so gentle it hardly needs explanation. It is not forceful like ginger or garlic. It is soft, very soft, like the final light of evening slowly dissolving into darkness. Lavender encourages relaxation and restful sleep. But perhaps more importantly, it creates the feeling that everything is finally slowing down. That night has arrived, that the body is allowed to rest. Chamomile carries a similar feeling. A warm cup of chamomile tea at night is not merely a drink, it is a ritual, a moment in which human beings finally allow themselves to release the tension of the day. Perhaps that is the most beautiful thing about the familiar medicinal plants around us. They do not only heal the body, they transform the inner atmosphere. Sage carries a more ancient feeling, like the scent of old homes, quiet gardens, and healing rituals that have existed for centuries. Thyme feels sharper, with powerful antibacterial qualities, and yet a fragrance that becomes soft and comforting once warmed. Licorice root carries a gentle sweetness that soothes the throat like a soft hand resting against a lingering cough. Hawthorn quietly supports the heart, not only in a biological sense, but almost symbolically as well. A small tree, caring for the very organ most closely tied to human emotion. Milk thistle protects the liver, as though nature understands that the body needs silent guardians within itself. Senna helps the body release what it no longer needs. Clove eases tooth pain with its warm and unmistakable fragrance. Every plant carries its own personality, its own rhythm, its own soul in the way human beings experience it. And perhaps the most remarkable thing is that most of them exist so close to everyday life. We often believe healing must come from something large and complicated, but familiar medicinal plants remind us that recovery sometimes begins with very small things. A warm cup of tea, a gentle fragrance, a moment in which the body is allowed to rest. According to Carl Gustav Jung, modern people often lose touch with the simple rituals of life. We move too quickly, through too much noise, and too much light, until we forget that the soul actually needs slow movements in order to feel safe. And perhaps medicinal plants are part of that slower rhythm. Brewing tea, boiling water, breathing in the scent of leaves, waiting for warmth to drift into the air. These actions force the mind to slow down. You cannot rush them. You cannot hurry through them. You must remain present, and sometimes that itself is healing. Not only the chemical compounds, but the simple fact that a human being finally pauses long enough to listen to the body. And if you think about that tonight, perhaps everything around you begins to soften a little. You do not need to search for healing in distant places. Perhaps part of it has always existed around you, in the kitchen, in the small garden, in the scent of warm tea, in the memory of being cared for as a child. And perhaps what the human soul has always searched for is not only recovery, but the feeling of being soothed, of being safe, of returning to something ancient and familiar, like the scent of lavender at night, like the warmth of ginger, like the soft sound of boiling water in a quiet kitchen. These simple things have accompanied humanity for thousands of years, and perhaps they are still quietly reminding us that life does not exist only to keep moving forward. Sometimes it simply needs a slow moment to rest, to be cared for, and to sleep peacefully beneath the gentle darkness of the night. Part 9. Modern science still depends on plants. As the night grows quieter and the final light of day dissolves into the soft darkness beyond the window, perhaps this is the perfect moment to reflect on something deeply humbling in the history of modern science, that despite humanity building enormous laboratories, sophisticated analytical machines and medical technologies so advanced they once seemed unimaginable, we still return to plants, still listening to nature, still searching for answers within leaves, roots, bark, and distant forests. And if you think carefully about that, it feels extraordinary, because modern human beings often like to believe we have moved far beyond the ancient world. We speak about artificial intelligence, gene sequencing, and medical breakthroughs, unlike anything in history. Yet beneath all of those technologies, one simple truth remains. Many modern medicines exist because someone once listened to a traditional healer, a person living close to nature, an indigenous community, an ancient wisdom passed through spoken stories for centuries. Perhaps this reminds us that science does not always begin through invention. Sometimes it begins through attention, through the humility to recognize that nature may have understood something long before we did. And if you think about that tonight, there is something very gentle within the idea. An indigenous healer, deep within a rainforest, may not understand molecular structures or modern microscopes, yet they know which plants reduce fever, which bark eases pain, which fragrances help the body sleep peacefully through the night. And then years later, scientists arrive carrying research instruments and the language of modern chemistry, only to discover that those plants truly contain powerful compounds capable of saving human lives. It feels like a beautiful meeting between two worlds, one shaped by intuition, memory, and ancient experience, the other shaped by modern science. And standing quietly between them is nature itself. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, modern humanity often loses contact with its primordial unconscious, the part that still remembers we once lived very close to trees, soil, and natural cycles. Perhaps that is why stories about medicinal plants feel both scientific and almost spiritual at the same time. Not superstition, but the feeling that nature still contains realities deeper than our current understanding. And perhaps the most astonishing truth is this: most plant species on Earth still have not been fully studied. Think about that slowly. Within vast tropical rainforests, beneath dense canopies where only fragments of sunlight touch the ground, there may exist plants humanity has never truly understood. A leaf containing an anti-cancer compound, a fungus capable of producing a new antibiotic, a root that may help treat illnesses modern medicine still cannot cure. All of those possibilities may exist very close to us, quietly, unknown, like secrets nature continues to hold patiently within itself. There is something deeply humbling in that thought, because it reminds us that no matter how far science advances, humanity has still opened only the first few pages of nature's immense book. A rainforest is not merely a collection of trees. It is a living chemical library, a world filled with reactions, compounds, and intricate relationships humanity has not yet even learned how to name. And that is beautiful, because it means the world still contains mystery, still contains undiscovered things, still contains hope. Today, as people speak endlessly about technology and progress, we sometimes forget that much of modern medicine still originates from nature. Aspirin from willow bark, anti-malarial medicine from sweet wormwood, cancer treatments from the yew tree. These are not rare exceptions. They are reminders that plants have spent millions of years quietly developing sophisticated chemical structures far longer than humanity itself has existed. Perhaps modern science does not entirely create medicine. Often, it is simply learning how to read the language nature wrote long ago. And if you see it that way, perhaps the modern scientist and the ancient healer are not as different as we imagine. Both are trying to listen. One uses intuition and experience. The other uses microscopes and data. But both stand before the same mystery life itself. According to Carl Gustav Jung, human beings always carry a longing to seek meaning from the world around them. And perhaps nature continues to fascinate us because it feels both familiar and impossible to fully understand. A forest may calm the human spirit, yet it may also make us feel small. A tree may save millions of lives, yet still contain countless mysteries we have not uncovered. And perhaps that mystery itself softens the mind. You do not need to understand everything. You do not need to control all of life. There are forces far greater than us quietly unfolding all around, like plants silently creating healing compounds within the darkness of forests. And this also changes the way we think about how humanity treats nature. Because if rainforests truly contain medicines humanity has not yet discovered, then every forest destroyed may also mean losing something irreplaceable. A species disappears. An unstudied compound disappears with it. A future possibility for healing may vanish as well. And that makes the silence of forests feel a little sadder, not only because beauty is disappearing, but because humanity may be losing secrets it never had the chance to understand. Perhaps that is why some things must be protected. Some things must be listened to more slowly. And perhaps the human soul is the same. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the deepest inner journey is not about conquering the unconscious, but learning how to enter into dialogue with it. Not through force, not through complete control, but through listening. Just as modern science is slowly learning again from nature, not through arrogance, but through curiosity and respect. And if you allow your thoughts to drift slowly with that idea tonight, perhaps everything around you softens a little. You do not need to know the future completely. You do not need to understand the whole world. You may simply remember that somewhere out there forests are still breathing in the darkness. There are still unnamed plants, still secrets nature has not yet revealed to humanity. And within that vastness, there is a deep sense of peace, that the world has never completely run out of hope, that life is still quietly creating the possibility of healing somewhere beneath distant leaves deep within the forest, without rushing, without noise, simply existing with patience, like your own breathing now, becoming slower, deeper, and drifting gently into the peaceful stillness of the night. Part 10. threats, and the future. As the night drifts deeper into stillness, and the world outside slowly sinks into the gentle darkness of evening, perhaps this is the right moment to think about something both sad and beautiful, that the forests which healed humanity for thousands of years are now in need of healing themselves. There is something strange about the age we live in. Modern human beings can fly through the sky, decode genes, and create technologies our ancestors could never have imagined. Yet at the same time, we are witnessing ancient forests disappear faster than ever before. Forests that once contained countless medicinal plants. Forests that preserved the biological memory of the planet. Forests that perhaps still hold remedies humanity has not yet discovered. And if you think about that slowly tonight, a quiet sadness may begin to appear. Not loud, not overwhelming, only like the feeling of watching something ancient slowly fade from the world. When a plant species disappears, it is not merely a scientific name vanishing from a textbook. It may be an unstudied compound, a medicine never created, a possibility for healing humanity we'll never have the chance to know. And if you think carefully about that, it feels astonishing. A tree growing silently within deep forests for millions of years may contain the answer to an illness modern humanity still cannot cure. And then, before anyone truly understands it, the forest disappears. Perhaps this is one of the reasons human beings feel so fragile before nature. We often imagine ourselves powerful and in control. Yet the deeper we study plants, the more we realize that humanity still depends upon the natural world far more than we once believed. Not only for breath, not only for food, but also for healing. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, modern people often suffer because they have lost contact with their own primordial nature. We live among concrete screens and constant noise until we forget that both body and soul were shaped within a different world, a world of forests, firelight, soil, and natural cycles. Perhaps that is why hearing about disappearing forests awakens a sense of loss deep within us, not only because of the environment, but because some unconscious part of humanity knows we are drifting away from something that once sustained us. Today's rainforests are not simply places filled with trees. They are living libraries of the earth. Within every layer of damp soil, every vine, and every leaf, there may exist thousands of compounds science has never encountered. A fungus capable of producing a new antibiotic, a plant that may help treat cancer, a tiny species carrying hope for illnesses humanity still cannot cure. And the heartbreaking truth is that many of these things may vanish before we even discover them. There is something profoundly fragile in that realization, because it reminds us that not every loss can be restored. An extinct plant will not return. A destroyed ecosystem may require hundreds or even thousands of years to recover. And perhaps the human soul is similar. According to Carl Gustav Jung, when human beings lose connection with the unconscious and with the nature within themselves, they often try to fill the emptiness through speed, consumption, and control. Yet deep inside, the emptiness remains. Perhaps because the soul knows it is missing something far more ancient: a forest, a silence, a feeling of living in harmony with life rather than struggling against it. Climate change, deforestation, and overexploitation do not only alter the natural world, they also alter the human psyche. Because when the natural world becomes unstable, the human mind struggles to feel primordial safety. Perhaps that is why more and more people feel exhausted, despite living in the most technologically advanced age in history. We have more technology, but less silence, more connection, but less belonging. And perhaps the disappearance of nature is part of that imbalance. Yet even within all of this, there are still people quietly trying to preserve the living memory of the earth. Seed banks, Botanical gardens, protected ecological reserves. These places carry a very quiet beauty. Imagine a deep underground chamber where millions of seeds rest silently in darkness. Every tiny seed carries within it the possibility of reviving an entire species. A future that has not yet arrived, a forest that may one day return. There is something deeply hopeful in that image, as though humanity is trying to preserve a fragment of the Earth's memory before it disappears. Botanical gardens carry a similar feeling. They are not merely places where plants are displayed. They are spaces devoted to protecting life itself. Gardens where people slowly care for each species, as though tending ancient stories of the planet. Perhaps that is the most beautiful part of preservation. It does not arise entirely from science, but also from love. From the feeling that some things are too precious to lose. And perhaps, if we look more deeply, the human soul also needs to be preserved in this way. Within the speed of the modern world, we often neglect the softest parts of ourselves. Silence, rest, a sense of connection with nature, moments spent simply listening to wind, moving through leaves. Yet just as forests must be protected in order to continue living, the soul also needs quiet spaces so it does not become dry and empty. According to Carl Gustav Jung, true healing does not come from forcing ourselves to become stronger. It comes from returning to our natural wholeness. Perhaps that is what nature has always been trying to teach us. A forest does not grow through rushing. A tree does not grow through pressure. Everything in nature requires time, balance, and care. Human beings are no different. And as you think about this tonight beneath the soft darkness, perhaps you begin to feel a little lighter. You do not need to control everything. You do not need to carry the whole world upon your shoulders. You may simply remember that somewhere out there, seeds are still sleeping quietly in the darkness. Gardens are still being tended slowly and lovingly. And there are still people quietly protecting trees because they believe the future remains worthy of hope. And perhaps hope itself is also a form of healing. Not loud, not dramatic, only a small light preserved within the darkness, like a seed resting beneath cold soil, still carrying within itself the possibility of becoming a forest. And perhaps your soul is the same. Even if it has grown tired, even if it has passed through many dry seasons, deep inside, there is still a living part of you waiting to rest, to heal, and to grow once more beneath the quiet gentleness of the night. Part 11. Why the scent of plants affects memory and sleep. As the night grows quieter and the space around you slowly dissolves into the soft stillness of darkness, perhaps this is the perfect moment to think about one of the gentlest and most mysterious things within the human mind. Scent. Not images, not sound, but scent. Something so invisible we can barely hold on to it, and yet capable of opening the deepest doors of memory inside the soul. A faint trace of leaves in the air, and suddenly you remember a distant afternoon from childhood, the smell of warm tea, and the body softens, as though someone is quietly taking care of you. The scent of wood rain-soaked grass or lavender in the dark, and the heart itself seems to slow down. And if you think about that slowly, there is something almost mystical about it, because scent does not move through the mind in the usual way. It travels directly into the deepest parts of the brain, the limbic system, the region connected to memory, emotion, and humanity's most primitive sense of safety, which means that before you even have time to think about a scent, the body has already felt it. And perhaps that is why scent carries more emotional power than we often realize. A song may remind you of a memory, but a scent can make you feel as though you are living inside that memory again. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, there are layers of the unconscious that modern people rarely reach through logic alone. Jung believed that beneath everyday thought exists a collective unconscious, a deep reservoir of symbols, memories, and primal feelings carried by humanity across thousands of years. And perhaps, scent is one of the fastest paths into that place. The smell of wood smoke can make the mind feel safe without understanding why. Perhaps because our ancestors lived beside firelight for tens of thousands of years, the scent of wet grass after rain can calm the body. Perhaps because humanity spent far more time sleeping within nature than inside cities. The fragrance of lavender at night can bring an unexpectedly deep peace, as though the body remembers something older than language itself. And if you think about that tonight beneath the gentle darkness, perhaps you begin to understand why scent affects sleep so profoundly. Because sleep is not only a state of the body, it is also a state of safety. A living creature only sleeps deeply when it no longer feels the need to remain alert. And somehow, the scents of plants awaken exactly that feeling. Perhaps you have experienced this without noticing. A room carrying the fragrance of herbal tea feels easier to relax inside. A pillow scented with lavender makes the night feel softer. A trace of mint clears tension from the mind, not because scent forces the body to sleep, but because it quietly whispers to the nervous system, "You are safe now." And that is beautiful when you think about it carefully. Because the human body does not respond to the world through thought alone. It responds through biological memory. According to Carl Gustav Jung, some memories do not belong only to individuals, but to the history of humanity itself. And perhaps certain plant fragrances carry exactly that kind of memory. Memories of forests, of darkness, of small fires glowing in nature, of the feeling of shelter after a long day of survival. Perhaps that is why natural scents soothe the soul, even when we cannot explain why. Because they are speaking to the oldest part of us, the part that existed long before phones, cities, or artificial light. A part that still remembers how to listen to the wind, remembers the smell of soil, remembers what it felt like to sleep beneath the night sky. Today, modern people live in a world almost overflowing with stimulation. Blue light, endless sound, news, screens, thoughts that never truly stop. And perhaps that is why the mind struggles more and more with sleep. Not because the body has forgotten how to sleep, but because the nervous system has forgotten what safety feels like. Plant fragrances, meanwhile, often carry the opposite quality. They slow things down. A warm cup of chamomile tea is not only a drink, it creates an atmosphere. The scent of sandalwood is not merely a fragrance, it makes the room itself feel quieter. Perhaps what plants give humanity is not only chemical compounds, but the feeling of returning to a slower rhythm, returning to nature, returning to the part of the unconscious not yet buried beneath modern noise. And if we think about it that way, to small nighttime rituals like lighting essential oils, brewing tea, or opening a window to let the cool scent of night drift into the room are not meaningless at all. They are gentle messages sent to the body. The day is over. You may rest now. And the body understands, not through language, but through feeling. Perhaps the most extraordinary thing about scent is that it does not require explanation in order to possess power. You do not need to understand the chemistry of lavender to feel calmer. You do not need to study the limbic system to feel peace when breathing in warm tea. It is almost as though nature communicates with human beings through a language older than words themselves, a language of instinct and memory. And perhaps that is why scent becomes tied to the deepest memories of life. The smell of a childhood kitchen, the scent of a mother's clothing, the fragrance of old wood inside a former home. Those scents rarely disappear completely from the mind. They rest somewhere deep beneath consciousness, until a single moment unexpectedly awakens them again. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the unconscious never truly sleeps. It always remains beneath awareness, waiting for the right symbols to unlock it. And perhaps scent is one of the strongest keys of all. A trace of grass or leaves can make a person feel peaceful without knowing why, because sometimes the soul remembers more than the mind. And as you remain with that thought tonight, perhaps your body also begins to slow down, breathing softer, shoulders loosening, thoughts becoming less sharp than they were during the day. You do not need to force yourself to sleep. You do not need to make yourself relax. You can simply imagine a distant nighttime forest, the smell of wet earth after rain, a faint trace of wood smoke from a small fire, the scent of leaves moving through cold wind, and somewhere deep within the body, an ancient part of you recognizes those feelings, the feeling of shelter, of safety, of rest, like our ancestors once felt thousands of years ago beneath star-filled skies before drifting into sleep. And perhaps that is what plant fragrances have always quietly offered humanity. Not only relaxation, but the feeling of returning to the most primordial truth of life itself, that beneath all the noise and tension of existence, there is still a very quiet place inside you. A place where even the softest scent can help the soul remember how to let go and sleep deeply within the gentle embrace of the night. Part 12. Healing Gardens Throughout Human History. As night slowly covers the roads outside and the world begins to move more slowly within the deep breathing of late evening, perhaps this is the perfect moment to think about something deeply gentle in human history, that for thousands of years, human beings have always tried to create gardens in order to heal themselves, not only to grow medicinal plants, not only to grow food, but to rediscover peace. And if you think about that slowly, there is something profoundly moving within it. Because across many civilizations, despite different languages, beliefs, and ways of life, humanity has always created healing gardens. Inside ancient European monasteries, monks cultivated lavender, sage, rosemary, and countless medicinal herbs beside quiet stone pathways. In the East, medicinal gardens were often built near temples, where the sound of water and the fragrance of tea drifted together through the evening air. Within indigenous communities, healing plants grew close to places where people rested and shared stories beside the fire. That was not accidental. Perhaps deep within human beings have always known that the soul needs plants far more than we realize. A healing garden is not merely a place containing vegetation. It is a state of mind, a space where life slows down enough for human beings to hear themselves again. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, the human soul constantly longs to return to primordial symbols: earth, water, trees, fire, darkness, and shelter. Jung believed much of modern suffering appears when people become separated from those symbols. Perhaps that is why gardens carry such a special feeling, even when we cannot explain it. Simply stepping into a quiet garden seems to change the body immediately. Breathing slows, shoulders soften. The mind no longer feels so sharp and tense, as though something ancient inside us quietly recognizes this is a safe place. If you imagine an old medicinal garden late in the afternoon, perhaps you can feel it more clearly. The final sunlight resting gently across leaves, the smell of damp soil after watering, the faint sound of summer insects somewhere within the grass, a breeze passing through mint leaves, no one rushing, no machinery, no blue light from screens, only nature breathing very slowly, and human beings finally breathing with it. Perhaps the most healing thing about those gardens was not any individual medicinal plant, but the rhythm of the entire space. Everything inside the garden reminded the body that it did not need to remain tense forever. A leaf does not grow through hurry. A flower does not bloom through pressure. A tree does not struggle against others in order to exist. Nature always develops through slowness. And perhaps the human soul was created for that rhythm as well. Today, we often imagine healing as something highly complicated. Yet for most of history, people healed themselves through much simpler things, sitting beneath trees, listening to water, touching soil, breathing in the scent of leaves during late afternoon. Modern science may describe this through nervous systems, hormones, or circadian rhythms. But beneath all those explanations, perhaps it is simply the feeling of returning to what is natural. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the unconscious mind still carries memories from thousands of years spent living within nature. We may now inhabit modern cities, but some deep part of us still responds to forests, firelight, and leaves exactly as our ancestors once did. Perhaps that is why quiet gardens move human beings in ways difficult to explain, because they awaken a primordial memory of shelter, a place where the body can finally rest without vigilance, a place where the mind no longer has to keep running endlessly. Ancient European monasteries understood this clearly. Their medicinal gardens were designed as enclosed spaces where people could walk slowly among the scents of rosemary, thyme, and lavender, not only to cure illness, but to pray, to reflect, and to rediscover silence within themselves. The same was true in the East. Gardens surrounding temples often combined medicinal plants, water and stone, in ways that created a profound sense of balance. People did not come only to heal the body, they came to calm the spirit. And that is beautiful when considered deeply, because for thousands of years humanity seems to have understood that body and soul are never entirely separate. An anxious mind can exhaust the body. A peaceful environment can heal more deeply than we imagine. Perhaps that is why many of humanity's most beautiful memories remain tied to nature. A childhood garden, the smell of soil after rain, summer cicadas, sunlight moving through leaves late in the afternoon. These images remain in the mind for a very long time, not because they are important in some grand way, but because they make human beings feel truly slow and alive. And perhaps that is exactly what the modern soul is missing. Too much information, too much noise, too many things demanding thought, but very few places of genuine stillness, very few inner gardens. According to Carl Gustav, Jung, healing is not about eliminating suffering entirely. It is about creating an inner space wide enough for the soul to rest. And perhaps healing gardens throughout history have always symbolized exactly that: a refuge, a silence, a place where human beings can return to themselves. And if you think about that tonight, perhaps you begin to understand why even looking at trees can soften the body. It is not accidental that people care for plants when stressed. It is not accidental that walking through parks lightens the mind. The body seems to remember that nature was once its home. And when we return close to trees, something deep inside begins to soften again. Perhaps that is why ancient healing gardens were always designed for slowness. No one runs through a healing garden. People walk gently, listening to leaves, breathing in flowers, touching the earth, as though everything in that space is quietly whispering, "You do not need to hurry anymore." And perhaps that is exactly what so many souls need to hear in this age. That rest is not wasted time. That silence is not meaningless. That sometimes healing is simply being able to sit somewhere filled with trees and soft light, long enough for the body to remember what peace feels like again. And as you allow your thoughts to drift with that idea tonight, perhaps everything around you begins to slow as well. Breathing deeper, shoulders softening, thoughts fading into the distance like tiny insects somewhere beyond a summer garden. And perhaps, somewhere deep inside, you too are creating a quiet garden of your own. A place that does not need to be perfect, does not need noise, only gentle enough for the soul to finally sit down and rest beneath the shade of its own trees. Part 13. Plants and the slow rhythm of nature. As the night grows deeper and everything around you slowly sinks into the quiet breathing of darkness. Perhaps this is the perfect moment to think about something modern humanity has gradually forgotten: that all life in nature grows very slowly. A tree does not hurry. A seed does not panic because it has not yet bloomed. A forest does not struggle to become anything other than itself. And perhaps that is why nature carries such a profound sense of peace. If you have ever stood for a long time before an ancient tree, perhaps you have already felt this, without putting it into words. There is a deep stillness inside trees, not the stillness of emptiness, but the slow rhythm of a life that does not need urgency in order to exist. Medicinal plants grow through light, through rainy seasons, through soil, through time, a little each day, a little each season. Nothing in nature happens too quickly. A leaf may need weeks to fully unfold. Roots may need years to reach deep into the earth. A forest may require centuries to become fully itself. And strangely enough, the things that grow slowly are often the most enduring and the most healing. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, the human soul also carries its own natural rhythm. Jung believed much of modern suffering appears when people live too far from their original biological rhythm. We push ourselves to become faster, more efficient, stronger, until the body and mind begin to forget how to rest. Perhaps that is why so many people today feel exhausted even when they have done nothing physically overwhelming. Not because the body has become weaker, but because life itself has become too fast. Too much artificial light, too much noise, too much information, too many thoughts that never truly stop. Modern people stay awake beneath blue light, eat quickly, think quickly, react quickly, as though life were an endless race with no finish line. Meanwhile, trees continue growing in the same ancient way, slowly, patiently, without panic. And if you think about that long enough tonight, perhaps you will feel a quiet sadness within it, as though humanity has drifted very far from the rhythm the body was originally meant to live beside. Long ago, people woke with the sun and rested when darkness arrived. Winter was a season for slowing down. Summer was a season of greater activity. The body lived alongside nature rather than against it. But today, time itself almost seems to disappear. Night and day blur together beneath artificial light. The seasons are no longer deeply felt. People work at midnight and wake to phone notifications instead of birdsong or sunlight. Perhaps the body is still trying to adapt, but somewhere deep inside, it still remembers the older rhythm. And perhaps that is why nature calms human beings in ways difficult to explain. Because when we are near trees, the body begins to remember that life does not need to move quickly in order to matter. A medicinal tree does not absorb sunlight in haste. It stands through many rainy seasons, many summers and many long years to slowly create healing compounds within itself. Perhaps the human soul also requires that kind of time, but we are often impatient with ourselves. We want healing immediately. We want to overcome sorrow quickly. We want to become a better version of ourselves right away. Meanwhile, nature has never worked that way. A forest does not recover overnight. A wounded tree needs time to regrow its bark. Barren land requires many rainy seasons before becoming alive again. Perhaps people are the same. According to Carl Gustav Jung, inner growth resembles a natural journey, more than a task to complete. We do not repair ourselves like machines. We grow, change, and recover the way trees do, very slowly, very quietly, and often so gradually, we barely notice it day by day. Perhaps that is why so many people feel peaceful while caring for plants. Because trees teach us patience. You cannot make a tree grow faster through worry. You cannot force a flower to bloom through pressure. You can only water it, allow sunlight to touch it, and wait. And perhaps that is a lesson for the soul itself. That healing does not always come from adding more to life. Not more work, not more information, not more achievement, but from removing things. Less noise, less rushing, less pressure to become perfect all the time. Like trees, simply standing quietly within light and time is enough to grow. And if you think about this tonight, perhaps you will begin to soften toward yourself. You do not need to have every answer right now. You do not need to recover immediately. You do not need to force yourself to stay strong all the time. Perhaps your body and soul simply need what trees have always possessed: time, silence, a slower rhythm of life. Perhaps what makes medicinal plants healing is not only their chemical compounds, but the way they exist, quietly, patiently, without competing, without rushing. A branch of lavender grows slowly beneath sunlight. A chamomile plant needs many weeks before flowering. A ginseng root may require years before reaching its fullest medicinal value. Nature never hurries to create precious things. And perhaps the most precious things inside human beings are the same: true peace, true maturity, the ability to love and be gentle with oneself. These things do not appear in a single day. They grow slowly, like trees. Perhaps that is why time itself feels different when sitting in nature. No longer so sharp, no longer so hurried. Everything softens. The sound of wind moving through leaves, sunlight slowly shifting across the ground, the smell of soil after rain. All these things seem to whisper gently to the nervous system, you do not need to keep running. And perhaps that is exactly what the modern soul longs for most deeply. Not more stimulation, but slowness. A deep night of sleep, an afternoon spent doing nothing, a moment of sitting quietly without guilt. According to Carl Gustav Jung, healing always asks human beings to return to the most natural part of themselves, not to become someone else, but to live in greater harmony with the true rhythm of the soul. Just as trees live in harmony with seasons, light and time, and as you allow your thoughts to drift slowly with that idea tonight, perhaps your body also begins to soften, breathing deeper, shoulders lighter, thoughts no longer needing to race so quickly. You do not need to force yourself to heal. You do not need to force yourself to be okay. You may simply exist like a tree within peaceful darkness, quietly absorbing stillness, quietly recovering, quietly growing. And perhaps that has always been the most natural way life heals itself across millions of years. Part 14. Medicinal plants as spiritual symbols in the braze. Human unconscious. As the night grows deeper and the world outside slowly dissolves into the ancient stillness of darkness, perhaps this is the perfect moment to think about something humanity has sensed for thousands of years: that trees are not merely plants. They are also symbols, something far deeper than trunks, leaves, and roots. If you look back through ancient civilizations, you will notice that trees almost always stood at the center of humanity's most sacred stories. Some trees were seen as bridges between heaven and earth. Some forests were believed to shelter spirits. Certain medicinal plants could only be gathered during rituals, beneath moonlight, or at moments when ancient people believed nature opened itself to humanity. And that is strange when considered carefully, because in places separated by thousands of miles with no communication between them, people still looked at trees in remarkably similar ways. Not only as food, not only as medicine, but as something carrying profound spiritual meaning. Perhaps this tells us that the connection between human beings and trees has lived deep within the unconscious, long before modern language ever existed. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, images that appear repeatedly in myths, dreams, and religions across civilizations are often archetypes, primordial symbols living deep inside humanity's collective unconscious. And the tree is one of the oldest archetypes of all. It is no coincidence that trees often symbolize growth, rebirth, the journey from darkness into light. A tree begins as a seed resting deep within dark soil. Then slowly, it rises toward light, creating branches, leaves, flowers, and fruit. That image almost mirrors the inner journey of human beings themselves. There are parts of us that once lay hidden inside the darkness of the unconscious. Memories, pain, potentials, never fully lived. And then life, like sunlight, slowly draws them upward into awareness. Jung believed true healing is not becoming a perfect person free from darkness. It is the natural maturation of the soul, like a tree growing from the earth, quietly, slowly, yet always reaching toward light. Perhaps that is why trees so often appear in human dreams. A great tree standing in a field, a deep forest, a branch growing through darkness. These images carry a strange feeling, both familiar and mysterious, as though the soul is trying to speak through a language older than words. In many mythologies, trees are seen as centers connecting different worlds. The world tree in Norse mythology joins heaven, earth, and the underworld. The Bodhi tree is linked to enlightenment in Eastern traditions. Sacred forests appear throughout countless ancient legends as places where human beings enter in order to be transformed. And if you think about that tonight, perhaps you will begin to feel that trees carry a very different kind of presence. Ancient trees often make people fall silent. No one stands before an old forest feeling exactly the same as they do in the middle of a city. There is something within trees that slows the mind, as though they belong to another sense of time, a rhythm deeper and older than modern humanity itself. Perhaps that is why medicinal plants often appeared within ancient healing rituals. People did not use them only for their chemical properties. They believed trees carried their own spirit. Modern science may no longer use that language. Yet deep inside, people still respond to trees in ways that feel almost spiritual. A forest can make someone cry without understanding why. The scent of plants can awaken memories with overwhelming force. A quiet garden can heal exhaustion in ways words cannot. Perhaps because trees do not only affect the body, they touch the unconscious. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the unconscious contains not only personal memories, but humanity's spiritual history as well. And perhaps deep within that place, trees have always been connected to safety and restoration. Our ancestors lived among forests for tens of thousands of years. They slept beneath trees, found food and medicine from plants, sought shelter in nature. Perhaps that is why some deep part of the soul still sees trees as home. Not home in the physical sense, but the feeling of belonging, of protection, of being allowed to grow slowly, without force. And if we think about it this way, a tree is actually very much like a human being. It has roots like our memories and our past. It has a trunk, the self standing within life, and it has branches reaching toward light, like the longing for growth and healing inside the soul. But perhaps the most beautiful thing is that trees never grow through self-rejection. A tree does not hate itself for not being tall enough. It does not panic because it has not flowered yet. It simply continues living according to its own rhythm. Perhaps that is the deepest lesson carried by the archetype of the tree. That growth does not mean forcing yourself to become someone else, but becoming fully yourself in the most natural way possible. According to Carl Gustav Jung, the true inner journey resembles a forest more than a straight road. There is darkness. There are places where we become lost. There are unexplored regions. Yet walking through that forest is exactly what allows people to encounter their deepest self. And perhaps that is why medicinal plants carry such special meaning, because they heal the body, while also reflecting the soul's journey toward healing. A tree absorbs both sunlight and darkness. Human beings do the same. We do not mature through joy alone. Often suffering is what deepens the soul. just as trees must pass through winter before flowering again. And if you think about that tonight, beneath the gentle darkness, perhaps you will begin to soften toward yourself. You do not need to bloom right now. You do not need to have every answer. Perhaps you are simply within a very slow season of the soul, like a seed resting silently beneath dark earth before rising. And that does not mean you have failed. It only means life is unfolding according to its natural rhythm. Perhaps that is why people always find a special peace near trees, not only because green calms the eyes, not only because the air feels fresh, but because deep inside, trees remind us of ourselves, that we too are part of nature, that the soul also needs time to grow, that healing is not always about fixing. Sometimes it is simply the slow process of a tree quietly reaching toward light. And as you allow your thoughts to drift with that idea tonight, perhaps your body also begins to soften, breathing deeper, shoulders lighter, thoughts fading away like distant wind moving through a nighttime forest. You do not need to do anything more right now. You may simply imagine an ancient forest beneath moonlight, trees standing silently, roots reaching deep into dark earth, branches touching the night sky. And somewhere within that stillness, your soul too is growing in its own way, quietly, patiently, and full of life. Part 15. Conclusion. Nature never stops healing. As the night becomes truly deep, and the sounds of the outside world slowly dissolve into stillness, perhaps this is the right moment to close this journey with one gentle thought. Nature has never stopped healing human beings. Even though the world has changed so much, even though we now live among concrete artificial light and endless streams of information, even though modern people can go through entire days without touching soil, without looking at the night sky, without hearing wind move through leaves, our bodies and minds still respond to nature almost exactly the way our ancestors did thousands of years ago. The scent of plants can still soften the heart. A quiet garden can still deepen the breath. An afternoon filled with sunlight and birdsong can still make the mind loosen in ways difficult to explain. And if you think about that slowly, there is something deeply moving in it. As though humanity may have traveled very far from the forest, yet somewhere deep inside we never truly left it. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, the collective unconscious carries memories far older than modern life itself. We may live inside cities, but beneath all layers of civilization, there still exists something ancient within us that remembers nature. It remembers the smell of earth after rain. It remembers small fires glowing in darkness. It remembers the feeling of lying beneath a sky full of stars without needing to rush anywhere at all. Perhaps that is why so many people feel peaceful near trees without fully understanding why. Because the body is remembering something very old, a slower rhythm, a safer feeling, a world where human beings were not stretched thin by constant noise. And perhaps medicinal plants have always quietly reminded us of this, that life always seeks recovery. A broken tree branch still grows new leaves. A forest after wildfire still begins healing from dark soil. A tiny seed sleeps through winter, then opens again when spring arrives. Nature never abandons life. It patiently finds its way back. Perhaps that is the gentlest lesson trees offer humanity. That healing is not a sudden moment. It is a process, very slow, very quiet, and sometimes almost invisible from one day to the next. Modern people want everything immediately. We want pain to disappear instantly. We want peace immediately. We want answers right away. But nature does not work like that. A tree does not grow overnight. A garden does not become green simply through desire. Everything needs time, light, rain, rest, and perhaps the human soul does too. According to Carl Gustav Jung, Inner growth resembles the development of a tree more than the repair of a machine. We do not heal the soul through pressure. We heal by allowing ourselves to move through time more naturally. Some pain needs to settle like earth after rain. Some memories need to be revisited very gently. Some parts within us only open once the body finally feels safe enough. And nature often creates that feeling of safety. Perhaps you have felt this before without naming it. A morning walk beneath trees makes the mind feel lighter. A breeze carrying the smell of grass softens the heart. A rainy night makes the body easier to sleep. These things seem very small, yet perhaps they are touching the deepest part of the human nervous system, the part that still remembers we lived alongside nature for far longer than we have lived inside the modern world. There is something quietly sad about the way modern people live so far from their natural rhythm. We stay awake beneath cold light, eat too quickly, think too much, work until exhaustion, then wonder why the soul feels tired all the time. Perhaps because the body was never created for that speed. Perhaps what it seeks is not more stimulation, but silence, a gentle darkness, a place with trees, a feeling of slowing down without guilt. Perhaps that is why the image of the healing garden has appeared inside humanity's unconscious for thousands of years. A quiet place, leaves moving in the wind, late afternoon sunlight, tiny summer insects singing softly. A place where human beings can finally sit down and stop fighting life for a while. According to Carl Gustav Jung, much suffering appears when people become separated from their deepest nature. And perhaps nature always helps us remember that nature again, not through words, but through feeling, a very ancient feeling, saying, "You are allowed to rest. You do not need to keep running. You are still part of this living world." And if we think deeply enough, medicinal plants were never only medicine. They were reminders that the body knows how to recover, that the soul also carries the ability to regenerate, that even after the longest winters, life still quietly survives beneath frozen soil. And perhaps the gentlest thing nature has ever taught humanity is this: nothing in nature grows through constant tension. Everything has its season of rest. Forests need winter too. The earth needs darkness too. Human beings do too. And as you allow your thoughts to drift with that idea tonight, perhaps everything inside begins to soften, breathing slower, the body growing heavier in a pleasant way, thoughts dissolving like mist across an ancient garden at night. You do not need to do anything more right now. You do not need to solve everything. You do not need to find answers for every unfinished thing in your life. You may simply imagine an old garden beneath moonlight, the smell of damp soil, leaves moving softly in the wind, gentle light passing through branches. And there, nobody asks you to be stronger. Nobody pushes you to move faster. There is only stillness, life, and the deep feeling that nature is still holding human beings the way it always has across thousands of years. Perhaps sometimes what the body truly needs is not more noise, but the quietness of an ancient garden, a place where the soul can finally set down its exhaustion and sleep deeply within the gentle arms of night. And now, as tonight's journey slowly comes to its final moments, perhaps what remains deepest in the mind is not only the stories of medicinal plants, ancient healing systems, or mysterious forests. Perhaps what remains is the feeling that human beings have never truly been separated from nature, no matter how much the modern world changes, no matter how busy life becomes. Some deep part of the soul still responds to leaves moving in the wind, the smell of wet earth, and the soft light of a quiet garden, exactly the way our ancestors once did thousands of years ago. Perhaps the body remembers more than we realize. It remembers resting beneath trees. It remembers nature's slower rhythm. It remembers silent nights before human beings were stretched thin by endless noise. And perhaps that is why medicinal plants carry such a special feeling, not only because they heal the body, but because they help the soul remember something ancient, that life does not always need to rush, that healing is a slow process, that sometimes the deepest thing a human being needs is not more stimulation, but a return to stillness. Through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, the deepest human journey is not conquering the outer world, but returning to oneself. And nature, in its gentle way, continually helps us do exactly that. A forest slows the mind. The scent of plants opens memory. A warm cup of tea at night softens the heart. These very small things sometimes become doorways, leading us back to the quietest and most peaceful place within ourselves. Perhaps, after all, medicinal plants were never only teaching us about medicine. They teach patience, how to grow slowly like trees, how to recover after winters of the soul, how not needing to bloom all the time does not make us any less valuable. And perhaps this is what you need to hear tonight. You do not need to solve everything immediately. You do not need to be strong all the time. You do not need to force yourself to heal quickly. Like nature, the soul has its own rhythm. Some days are for growth. Some days are for rest. Some darkness is necessary before light returns again. So now, allow yourself to slow down. Allow your shoulders to soften a little more. Allow your thoughts to dissolve slowly, like night mist drifting through a silent garden. You do not need to carry everything with you into sleep. Today was enough. And perhaps tonight, somewhere deep inside your body, is also trying to heal in the most natural way it knows, quietly, slowly, and gently, just as trees have always done for millions of years. If you enjoy these gentle nighttime journeys exploring the mind-sleep nature and the depths of the unconscious through the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel Stories for Sleep and continue joining us during future quiet nights. Each video is meant to be a slow, peaceful space where you can rest from the noisy world outside and return a little closer to yourself. And now, take one deep breath, gently close your eyes, and let the night hold your mind like an ancient garden filled with peace. May you sleep deeply, softly, and peacefully beneath the quiet trees of the midnight world.